Hey all, welcome to another RPG rant. Had enough of these yet? More to come. Well, today I was checking my inbox and a particular individual ended up posting about how to maintain your control as a DM. Now, I can understand maintaining control over the group dynamic a little bit in order to make sure that everybody stays in a character, that the joking doesn't go too far and doesn't go to complete immersion levels being broken, shattered. Bane just putting it over his knee, that kind of situation. And I can understand needing on occasion to pull some player aside and end up saying, you know, this might be going too far, or maybe it's a case of this particular player might be becoming disruptive and not aware of it. Maybe I just need to smack them upside the head and end up telling them that Angry Birds is not the time to be played during a session. I'm pretty sure I can word that sentence better. Nevertheless, you get the point. So, the thing that initially ended up bothering me was when it was brought down to the idea of maintaining control over the campaign. And this came from the idea that you're going to have plot points, and these events the players need to get to. They need to be on point A, point B. You need to go A, B, C, D, all the way down, all the way to the conclusion. And in the same breath, say that player choice matters. Now, I might be horribly misconstruing this, but it would seem to me that the idea this person had was I'm going to put them on rails. I'm going to let them have a little bit of fun side to side, flail their arms out of the cart and all that. But at the end of the day, they're going to be on rails. The only difference is I decided to spray paint some camo coating over the rails so this way they're not quite as obvious. This isn't the type of game I like to play. This isn't the type of game I think anybody should be experienced to if they have any experience role playing whatsoever. Here's the reason. Because at the end, a false choice is not a choice. It's a you're being led by the nose as opposed to being cattle prodded in. That's basically the only real difference. There wasn't a choice involved. The characters and the players really didn't make any difference. They didn't shape that story. That story was already shaped, and the players were just along with they're just along for the ride. That's it. The sad truth of it is that when this happens, you will lose player interest. The thing is this will happen regardless of whether the rails are hidden or openly exposed. And I might even have a little bit more respect for the person who ends up doing them openly exposed and saying, this is the kind of plot we're going to run. This is where my skills as a GM are. That's great. Fine. I will probably do a game based on these kinds of situations. I think to up the level a little bit, okay, maybe that's the way you want to go, but I don't think that is. I don't think that is the way you want to go. In order to craft a story the way I am doing it, at least, I find is crafting the world. You don't need to go through every single piece. You don't need to figure out how many straws make this particular roof of the leaky lodge or whatever the heck else setting you want to make. But you do need to have a good understanding of different NPCs' motivations. Here's the kicker. The real kicker ends up coming down to when the player, if at any point they discover that, well, so we were going to meet this dragon one way or another. We were always going to be forced to this dragon. Okay, why did we bother with anything else then if we knew this was going to be? We could have literally just skipped 3 hours worth of play that meant nothing. And you could have started us just outside the dungeon like you probably wanted to do, but you said you wanted to flesh it out a little. And just say, this is the background of how you guys ended up here, and go. Nothing wrong with it. No shame in it. But to end up claiming that a false choice is still a choice in the narrative, it irks me. That rubs me the wrong way. Like I said, maybe I'm misconstruing this, but when you end up going about building plot, here's what you need to end up doing. And this was some of the best advice I was given, and I'm going to end up sharing it with you. All plots are based around the core questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. The plot, however, does not revolve around the players. The story is told through the players. The story can revolve around their characters later on, but the players themselves do not necessarily start what kicks off the entire plot. No. That is your villain. That's your antagonist. That's your NPCs, because they have their own wants and desires. They will do things regardless of if the PCs are there or not. In fact, what they're doing usually doesn't start with the PCs in mind. It's just that the PCs' lives are affected by this particular event, individual, what have you. And that's where the paths first cross. What the players decide to do about it and how they go about it then ends up dictating the terms on how they end up relating to the person who may or thing that might have triggered this event. And from there, it's kind of a push me pull you. They choose how to interact. The other individuals start figuring out, there's this group, this adventuring party that seems to be getting in my way. Why is that? Let's dispose of them, maybe. Maybe I can tempt them over. It all depends on what kind of NPC you have. This grows it organically. Now, this is a caveat I tell to all my players. I am the world reacting. You've heard me say this 1,000 times. You'll hear me say it 1,000 times again. I am simply the world doing what it's going to do and reacting to what the players do in the process. It is the players that create and push the narrative. I simply create the situation. And the situation oftentimes is a consequence or result of the player's creation. When you do it in this style, suddenly what the players do actually does matter. I know, fancy that, huh? It's not only choice, it's choice with true consequence. And plot development comes entirely from them. Now, there was mention the players might get sidetracked and suddenly we want to go down this path and go down this path. Guess what? That happens in real life. It happens because people end up changing jobs, changing focuses, changing hobbies. They change all the time. Instead, the question should be, what is it that you have left undone? Don't be afraid to let the party fail. Now, you're not trying to set them up for failure. You're trying to end up helping them tell an engaging story through their own actions, and what that story entails is entirely on them. A plot device that just gets them started is all you need, and the rest of it is just them interacting with the world and the problems that eventually start creeping up and how they choose to influence the world through their actions, through their words, through their deeds, through their reputation. It's their choice. It's their story. You're just here to help tell it. if I ended up running into an individual who was trying to do this, and they're like, well, I'm worried that the players aren't going to be satisfied with the ending. So what? I know that sounds harsh, but the thing is that is a consequence. Now, let's consider. Uh, if I recall off the top of my head, this was the scenario he was giving. The players run into a basilisk and are suddenly turned to stone. Well, thing is if the roles went that way and the players ended up making the decisions that eventually led to that, fine. You don't need to end up going to send an NPC to rescue the players unless it is well within the understanding of that NPC who's probably going to do so. It makes perfect sense. If it doesn't, if you need to push it that way, instead, treat it as a reroll. But the next time they end up coming in with a new set of characters, show them the consequences of their actions and inactions, their loss. It's not just the death of their character, but their deaths have now changed the world in some way. Maybe they didn't stop that dragon from burning that town down to the ground. Maybe that basilisk still haunts the hillsides. Maybe, just maybe, that lord that they were going to take down has now started pushing his war further south, has now impacted so many more lives because of their failing. That gives them weight. That gives their choices hard consequence. Most importantly, it tells your players that they matter and that their choices are their own. Their victories and losses are their own. There is no predetermined destiny to force them down this track or that track, lest the story call for it. No. What they want to feel is agency. And the second a player ends up getting the notion that they never really had a choice at all, that these things were bound to happen, then they feel like the GM has screwed them. Then they feel like they got taken over the table. Because that's not the story that they were engaged in. That's not the one that they were trying to help tell. They just were kind of forced to come along for the ride. And reality is any character they brought in would have been fine. Because the character wasn't important to begin with. If the character is not important, that creative spark of a player who put the time and effort to create a personality and the details and the history and the personality and everything about this character, putting all that creative energy into this character to give to the world that the storyteller, the GM, flame tender, whatever you want to call them, creates. What are you saying about your player? Choices matter. And the thing about when you put up that GM screen, when you're rolling the dice, when you're the one describing the scene, you're in control of the world. That's it. But tossing their hard work aside doesn't speak well at all. I think that's what left a bad taste in my mouth. Because at that point, the story could have been a fan fiction. It didn't need the players. It was going to happen one way or the other. You could have filled in a whole bunch of generic cookie cutter PCs and just played it out on your own, written it out and submitted it to a forum or something. But when you engage in this hobby, this is an entire group coming together to tell the story. You're a part of it, no question. But so are they. And if you don't give that agency to your players, well, I might as well be listening to an audio recording.